everybody down here tonight, this weekend. It looks like it's going to be a really excellent conference. And it's great to see that there's a packed room for a discussion about James Connolly, as there should be. The last year has been a year of 1916 commemorations and celebrations, as we all know. Maybe they've died down a wee bit right now, but there's been a lot that's been going on over the last year, marking 1916, and as there should be, because it's such an important event. But I would say that there's barely been a mention of Connolly's revolutionary Marxism and his vision of a socialist republic run by workers and for the working class. And I don't think that this is an accident that this has happened. The Irish Free State, as we know, that was born out of the rebellion against British rule, had nothing in common with the kind of vision that James Connolly had, and it was actually a terrible place. It was really the exact opposite of what Connolly was hoping for and striving for and fighting for. And this was the Free State was born out of a counter-revolution that was meant to push back into the box all the streams of liberation that opened up in the period after 1916, between 1918 and 1923. Those aspirations for a completely different kind of society that many people associated with the kind of politics and ideas that Connolly had put forward were smashed and were crushed. It was a terrible place for workers' rights. It was hostile to women. It was an unequal society, pro-capitalist, with the rich on top, and with reactionaries on top, promoting the ideas of a very restrictive Catholic Church. And in this context, James Connolly's ideas had to be distorted, they had to be buried, and they had to be crushed, or they had to be ignored. And that's what happened with Connolly's ideas. All sorts of efforts were made to neutralise his ideas, to make them align with the existing Free State and the way it was, as if this is what Connolly had been about. And his martyrdom was all about creating the Irish Republic that developed in the early 1920s. And that has been allowed to last for a long time. And really, it's only been when the left has had discussions over the last year that we've introduced these types of ideas that Connolly spent his entire life fighting for, campaigning for, and developing, because he played a role in developing Marxist and socialist ideas theoretically as well, along with his activism, which is really crucial. And I think we can also say that many people who claim to stand in Connolly's tradition have emphasised the support for an Irish Republic, but have played down the fact that Connolly was for, of course he was for an independent Irish Republic, but that Connolly was for an Irish Socialist Republic. That's what Connolly stood for, and that was his argument. And he also ignored Connolly's argument that the working class struggle should never have to wait until some kind of independent liberation was achieved. Many people went along with this idea is that we put all our push into getting national independence, and then we can worry about workers' rights. And if you want to struggle for socialism, go ahead and do that. But don't be talking about class, don't be talking about workers' rights now, because it'll only end up dividing the struggle and so on. So this was another way of dampening down the kind of political arguments that Connolly helped to develop that were so important. There's also, as we know, many who were quite happy to take Connolly, put a gun in his hand, and summarise him and saying, that's Connolly's militancy, and that anybody that's for the armed struggle right now, you're following in the tradition of James Connolly, and just focus on his participation in the 1916 Irish Rising, and that was enough for people to actually know. So I think that by ignoring the discussion about socialism, it stopped the development of people learning about what socialism is, what a strategy for winning it could be, and it allowed people to pay lip service to it as if they were supportive of some of the goals of James Connolly as well. And so I think that this helped to push back the socialist movement across Ireland, both in the north and the south. And it kept, even on the left, it meant that sections of the left that claimed to endorse Connolly's ideas actually played a role in suppressing them and not allowing and not bringing out his confidence or his support for a workers' republic. And I think we're in a situation right now where across Ireland, whether you're in the north, in the south, whether you're living in Dublin or Derry or Belfast, whether you're on the Shankill or the Falls Road in Belfast, capitalism is really destroying people's lives. And it's really grinding people down with poverty. We're seeing our public services absolutely decimated for profit. We're seeing low-paid, stressful jobs. This is what people's horizon is right now across Ireland. And we're seeing substandard housing because of the destruction of social housing. And I think this is, as we know, leading to increased levels of mental health problems for people, and it's creating hopelessness as well in a lot of communities across Ireland. I went to watch Ken Loach's movie this week. I went to watch it with about there was probably 25 other members of People Before Profit. It was Tuesday night, crazy night. It was half price, so we all went and watched it collectively. It was a full cinema, and I think that everybody in that cinema was in tears because of what was happening to that person, Daniel Blake. And I would recommend anybody going to see it. And really, what we're seeing there is people being, people's lives being destroyed, people being left by themselves and told you're useless, there's no role for you in this society. And I think that that's what's happening to people across Ireland. People are being crushed. And I think obviously our goal is to reverse that, to reverse all these things that are attacking working class people's lives and fight for a different kind of society. And we need a culture of solidarity and a culture of resistance. And I think Connolly understood that. He was at the forefront of promoting this idea of working class solidarity and resistance. And I think we also need a vision of a different kind of society. In the face of all the onslaught of attacks that we're feeling across the board, we need a different kind of vision. And that's why I think now more than ever, right, in the midst of the struggles that we've also seen across Ireland, these struggles have to be attached to something that we are actually fighting for. And I think that that's where, if we can introduce people to the genuine ideas of Connolly, or the real Connolly, I think it'll strengthen our movements, and it'll give people a link with the struggles in the past, which are very, very important right now. I think our struggles today should be about establishing a democratic socialist workers' republic, or a socialist society, or a socialist Ireland. Call it what you want, but I think we have to put socialist ideas and that kind of vision at the forefront of what we are aiming to do. Now, James Connolly's ideas and politics didn't remain static. He didn't wake up one morning and have a whole set of revolutionary ideas, and this is what he did then for the rest of his life. I think the period that Connolly lived in and participated in, there was periods of massive upheaval. If you think about Irish politics, global politics, the First World War, and so on. And he developed his ideas and changed his ideas in some ways through his involvement in those struggles and his participation in the international socialist movement in Ireland, Scotland, England, and the United States. So he was able to draw on that participation to shape the kind of ideas that he had in terms of activism, in terms of what he thought about Irish politics. But I would argue one thing never changed about James Connolly, right? And that was his commitment to socialism, his commitment to working class struggle, his opposition to capitalism, his opposition to imperialism, and his opposition to reformism. Connolly was for a revolutionary, he had a revolutionary socialist vision, and he was, till his very death, and when he was shot by a British firing squad, he was committed to the overthrow of the existing order. And I think that that's a very important, I think it's very important to state that, because I think there's been debates about nobody can claim James Connolly, it's impossible to claim James Connolly because of the kinds of struggles that he was involved in different places. But I think anybody who wants to claim or stand in James Connolly's tradition has to contend with his commitment to socialism and revolutionary politics. So I'm pretty convinced that James Connolly would never be heading over to the White House to beg to get in on St. Patrick's Day so that Ireland can get some sort of crumbs from corporate America. And anybody who does that is not standing in James Connolly's tradition. He wouldn't be going over there to shake hands with the people who are responsible for the murder of black people, for funding Israeli war crimes against Palestinians, and inflicting misery across the world, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan. I'm pretty convinced that James Connolly, if he was leading the trade union movement today in Ireland, wouldn't be signing up for agreements that devastate working class people's lives and tell people not to strike and not to fight back. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be asking for young people living in Jobstown to be locked up for protesting against austerity. So I think that that's the way we should think about how to think about James Connolly's tradition and who should be able to claim it. So I think important to understanding where Connolly was coming from is to look at his background. I think for a while, trying to create this myth about Connolly that he was a simple Irish martyr, and that's what 1916, it was his sacrifice for the Irish nation, that he was born in Ireland. And of course, he wasn't born in Ireland. He was born in Scotland in 1868. He was born in Edinburgh. His parents had been refugees from the Irish, or the Great Famine, or the Irish Hunger. And like a million other people, they had to leave Ireland. Like we're seeing millions of people right now fleeing war and destruction across the Middle East. That was the lot of Irish people, not that long ago. And that's why Connolly's parents ended up in Scotland. It was much cheaper to get to Scotland than it was to get to the United States or to get to Australia. So this was part of Connolly's experience. That was his background, living in a marginalised community in Glasgow. His father was in the lowest paying jobs in poverty-stricken areas, and Connolly, from a very, very young age, was out working, desperately low paying jobs. And I think that this is Connolly's experience growing up working class is absolutely crucial to understanding his commitment to the working class struggle. Now, he also joined the British Army in 1882. Again, a lot of young working class people in Scotland of an Irish background did join the British Army. And I think that I didn't know this about James Connolly, that he had spent 7 years in the British Army and went on to lead the Irish Revolution. And I think that this is important just in terms of having a vision of how someone can start in a certain place and end up playing a very, very different role. And I think, again, when Connolly went to Ireland in 1882, this was his first time in Ireland. I'm sure he'd heard all sorts of stories about Ireland, but he went there in a British uniform, serving the Queen on the Queen's shilling. And we don't know a lot from the records about what he did in Ireland, but we know the various places that he served in. We think he might have been sent out to deal with sectarian rioting in Belfast in the 1880s. And I think he would have got a view on how British imperialism operated in Ireland and how British rule operated there as well. There's a couple of great articles that are worth reading about Connolly's experience when he was in the British Army, because he never spoke about it, right? He never talked about it, and maybe we can understand why. Maybe people would say, well, how can you claim to be a great Irish militant after you served for seven years over here putting down Irish people? You can imagine Irish nationalists who weren't interested in equality would have went after these things. So there's all sorts of ways that this might have embarrassed Connolly. But if you read his couple of articles, one of them is called Economic Conscription, you get a sense of his hatred for the army and what it represented and the role it played in society in terms of being a tool of the ruling class, or at the time a tool of the British Empire, going out to put people down and to control people. But he also had a great sympathy for soldiers who ended up in the army as well, and I think that that's an important thing that we have to remember. So Connolly went AWOL in 1889 from the army, maybe because his regiment were being sent off to India. It's not fully clear. This might have been another reason why he decided to kind of not talk about his time in the army too much, because the British authorities might have went after him and tried to hold him to account of that. But he went back to Scotland in 1889, and this is where he joined the Scottish Socialist movement. His brother was already a leading member in Dundee, and Connolly got involved in, where at the time there was a free speech fight being led by the Socialist movement. The world that Connolly was living in at the time, I think, looks very, very similar to the world that we live in right now, just in terms of how did Connolly join the Socialist movement? Why did Marxism in particular become something that he was attracted to and that helped him understand the world that he was living in? So Connolly was born in 1868. 20 years later, 20 years earlier, Marx and Engels had written the Communist Manifesto, and at the time, as we know, when they wrote about capitalism, it was a very limited system in terms of what it looked like and where it existed. By the 1880s, 1890s, right, when Connolly was beginning to come into adulthood, capitalism had seen a massive, massive expansion all over the world. There was tremendous growth in world trade, a massive growth, massive growth in imperial domination around the world. Industry had spread everywhere, and I think what we can say is that there was tremendous wealth being created all over the world, but at the same time a lot of misery, and that is what that was what Marx and Engels emphasised and talked about, so we really had, as Marx and Engels said, castles along with hovels. An industrial society and technology, rather than liberating people, ended up destroying people's lives and shackling them to machines and crushing their humanity. And so that was the world that Connolly became active in. This is the world that he was forced to exist in. And I think a whole generation of people in that period began to look to Marxism as a new set of ideas that could explain what was happening in the world, make sense of it for people, but also offer a way out of this nightmare that people were living in. And the way out was mass working class struggle, because capitalism not only was creating great wealth, but also it created this global proletariat, or global working class, that capitalism was fully dependent on. And so, what Marxism said at the time was that we could take the working class, could seize that wealth, seize the means of production, and transform society and put it to work for the vast majority of people, rather than a tiny minority. And we could abolish scarcity, and we could abolish want, hunger, and war, and really fulfill the human potential. And the reason why I'm emphasising this, right, is when people think about James Connolly, don't think about creating the full development of human potential. But Connolly actually talked about this. These are the kind of things he was interested in as somebody who was part of that international socialist movement, and this is what really drove his radicalism. But there was another set of things then that really confirmed these ideas in practice, right? Which is that capitalism wasn't just a system that went up and away. It went from boom to bust. So every time there was a big economic expansion, it would fall back on itself. Workers would be thrown into unemployment and poverty, and that cycle would go on. And that radicalised people and pushed people into collective action to do something about it. So we've seen groups of workers fighting back, organising. So the kind of arguments that Marx had made became a reality. So the new unionism period, again, that broke out in the 1880s in Britain, also had an Irish dimension to it, where there was a kind of unorganised workers who were previously unorganised, organised massive strikes, demanding better pay, demanding better conditions, that were a break on the kind of strategies, or a change from the kind of strategies that the trade union movement had been advocating for quite a while. And they really, those new unionist struggles rocked Ireland and they rocked Britain. And I think what they did is it raised the confidence of people who had become socialists, who looked at Marxism. And that's really where Connolly's starting point was, that there was a generation of people like him who became very confident about the working class's ability to transform society. And that, despite the power that capitalism had at the time, they had a tremendous confidence and hope about what the world could actually look like. Connolly arrived in Ireland in 1896, involved in different fights and so on, that he couldn't get a job. So he was confronted with poverty. He had a family, and he almost went to South America to try his hand at farming. So he could have been, James Connolly mightn't have ended up in Ireland, but there was a socialist comrade of his that wrote an article, put it in a newspaper called Justice, that said, there's this great organiser, is anybody interested in his services? And Connolly ended up coming to Dublin and hooked up with the Dublin Socialist Society, or Socialist Club. And within a couple of months, Connolly, with a group of socialists, had founded the Irish Socialist Republican Party. And it was a tiny, tiny group of people that did this. I think they met in a bar. I'm not sure what the street was, but the pub might even still be there. Now, again, Connolly and his comrades Connolly in particular might have been confident about the ability of socialist ideas to get a hearing, but not all socialists were very confident about socialism's prospects in Ireland. 8 years before Connolly arrived in Ireland, Engels was interviewed by a New York newspaper and said, look, there's not much hope for socialism in Ireland. Right? I love Engels, I think he's great, but he said it's basically a peasant country, it's an agrarian country, there's a very, very small working class there, it's not industrialised, this is not going to be the place where we're going to see combative working class struggle. He did think that there was space for rebellion in Ireland, but he didn't think about it as a working class rebellion. It would be more popularly organised. So that was important in terms of shaping or thinking about what people like who were around the socialist movement in that period might have thought about their prospects in Ireland and Dublin. And here this guy Connolly arriving in with a different kind of attitude. So within a couple of months, Connolly had founded with his comrades a new organisation, and I think then we begin to see Connolly. It's not the case that Connolly arrived in Ireland and then the socialist movement began. There's a great book by Fintan Lane that goes through the origins of the modern socialist movement in Ireland, where he kind of documents efforts to, socialist organising in Ireland for a couple of centuries almost. Utopian socialists were organising in Ireland. There was an attempt to build a kind of utopian type society. There was a section for a while of the International Working Man's Association that Marx founded, which was basically crushed and ran out of town by reactionaries. There was an attempt by William Morris's organisation to set up in Dublin and organise as well. So it's not the case that there was no socialism and then Connolly turned up. There had been attempts to build and organise. I think the difference that happened when Connolly arrived was that Connolly began to try and take the Marxist ideas that he had developed or learned in Scotland and apply them to Irish political reality, Irish social reality. And so the founding statement of the Irish Socialist Republican Party comes out in the summer of 1896, and it basically says we are for. I think that one of the aspects of socialism is that the two struggles in Ireland were very disconnected. You had a kind of tradition of independent struggle for an independent Ireland, and then a socialist struggle that didn't try to take up the national question and seen it as kind of, well, we're for socialism, we're not for independence, or we're not for any kind of anything. We're not for a national state that isn't about socialism. Anyway, two strains in a sense of a struggle. And I think what Connolly did is he tried to give socialist content to the national struggle, which I think was a very important political development. And I think it's important because it was happening. This was not something that was happening in the major centres of the socialist movement across Europe. This was happening in a colony, and it was people who were facing colonisation, trying to figure out how is a socialist movement going to develop in Ireland, and how do we tackle British imperialism and British rule here, and how do we break it? So the framework that they laid out was one that they were for a socialist republic where the means of production in Ireland, agriculture, would be in the hands of the people of Ireland, of the working class, and that their argument was that the British Empire in Ireland would be destroyed or driven out. The struggle for socialism would lead to the incidental destruction of the British Empire. And I think so what Connolly did is he situates the working class struggle at the very centre of the struggle for change in Ireland, rather than looking at the other classes, the middle class, the bourgeoisie, who had in some ways an interest at times in Irish independence. Rather than looking to all those other classes, Connolly developed a set of ideas that said We have to look at the role that the working class can play in leading the struggle for a workers' republic that will not only bring about workers' control, but will also end British rule in Ireland. And I think that that was a kind of fantastic political, a unique political contribution in a sense to the struggle in Ireland, in a theoretical sense. And they didn't stop there. They then, Connolly, through the newspaper that his party had developed, tried to develop socialist positions on all sorts of questions. Whether it was religion, republicanism, on Sinn Féin, they tried to address this. Now, I think this was important because people obviously were looking for some kind of political alternative. So I think that the key political arguments that Connolly laid out was, and you go back, and if you look at his book, Labour in Irish History, right, there's a set of political arguments. He attempts again to root the case for socialism in Irish traditions. So he looks at, pre-conquest Ireland. I think that he looks at Gaelic Ireland and says this is a very equal society. I think he probably overstated the level of equality and played down, in a sense, the class dimensions of Gaelic society or pre-conquest society. But nevertheless, what he was trying to do was say, how do we understand socialism coming out of Irish soil, and how do we relate it to the Irish experience? And I think that that's worth discussing and thinking about. The other argument that Connolly really goes through, and that he was key to win, because he was trying to make an argument to working class activists, but also people who were attracted to republicanism, right? Who were up for the fight for an Irish republic and didn't want to settle for home rule, or were frustrated at the middle class leaders of the home rule movement. He was trying to articulate an argument to those layers of people that trying to bring together all the various classes in Irish society was going to lead to disaster, right? So his book, Labour in Irish History, really goes through, because we're brought up with this idea that we've all been in this struggle together, right? That, rich, poor, middle class, we're all confronted with British rule, so it's going to have to be a united struggle. We still get echoes of that today, right? Or, what role can business in the North play now in creating a united Ireland? Very little, I would say, but there's echoes of these ideas coming from similar political traditions that Connolly was engaging with at the time. And Connolly just, in a ferocious way, just goes through all the portrayals of the middle class, of the sections of society who hope to become the rulers of Ireland in an independent one, and how they betrayed working class rule, and how they preferred British rule if it protected their interests over an independent Ireland where workers' rights and the rights of the poor would be at the forefront. So I think that was another systematic political argument that Connolly put forward. He described the working class as the only class that would have an interest in leading the Irish struggle through to a finish, because other classes would abandon that struggle because they're he particularly talked about the Irish ruling class being tied to capitalism in 1,000 ways, and that they were more focused on protecting capitalism than they were ever going to be in fighting for a truly liberated Ireland. So, I think I think that you can think about that as a kind of, rather than a kind of stagist revolution, right? That was more a vision Connolly developed in the Irish context, a vision of a kind of permanent revolution, where there wasn't necessarily going to be this struggle for independence and then someday down the line. Connolly's vision really put workers at the centre of fighting for a different kind of society, and through that you would end up with workers' control and the end of empire. I think that these ideas that he developed in that period stayed with him for the rest of his life. And I think we can talk about how they developed into 1916. But Connolly didn't just stop at the development of political ideas. The party, even though it was small, got involved in all sorts of activism, protesting the Jubilee of Queen Victoria, basically organising what ended up to be riots in the streets. They were involved in trade union activism. They stood in elections. They tried to build a mass base through activism, but also a space for their political arguments. And it's not the case that everybody was delighted that there was this new vibrant socialist organisation. There was plenty of groups that wanted to see the socialist movement absolutely crushed and destroyed. So Connolly, there were difficulties for Connolly and his comrades sustaining the organisation that they were attempting to build, because of the poverty in Ireland, it wasn't just that there was financial difficulties. There were also political arguments happening in Ireland in the early 1900s that were part of the international socialist movement that were impacting on their efforts to organise. There was the beginning, I think, in that period of a split between what we would call revolutionary socialism and a kind of version of socialism that was focused on reformism, and I think that was impacting Connolly's organisation, because there was political arguments, there was disagreements, and in a small organisation struggling to survive against bigger political traditions, this became a challenge. Connolly, as the organiser and kind of driver of the project, I think faced a situation where, again, there's a lot of poverty. So he goes to the United States in 1903 to try and make a better life, to try and survive, and with some frustrations as well about, despite the good work that the party was able to do, with some frustrations about how he'd been treated and so on. And I think his experience in America deepens his politics and deepens him in a number of things. He joins the Wobblies. I don't know if people have heard about the Wobblies, but the Industrial Workers of the World were founded in the US in 1905. Thank you. What's that? Three what? Left. Sorry. Yeah. But they were founded in 1905. They were really the founding of the Wobblies were inspired from a number of different directions. There had been a revolution in Russia in 1905, where mass strikes and the activity of the working class had been at the centre of it, rather than the emphasis on getting somebody elected, right, who was a socialist reformer who would bring socialism about through Parliament. People were excited about this, and American radicals and trade unionists were frustrated at the conservatism of the trade union leadership and its unwillingness to actually support working class struggle and strikes. So they formed this organisation, and Connolly, like many other people, like Eugene Debs, was very, very excited about its creation. And underpinning the kind of vision of the Wobblies was revolutionary syndicalism, which is basically seeing the trade union movement, a revolutionary trade union movement, at the heart of the struggle to overthrow capitalism. So many of the people who were involved in the Wobblies downplayed the need to build a political party. Connolly didn't. He actually believed that the Wobblies needed to found a working class socialist organisation. But the thrust at the time through the Wobblies was a kind of rejection of politics for understandable reasons, because political activism by socialists had become about electoralism, and that's what led people to this emphasis on workplace action, building militant unions, and building a big union, one big union, where workers could eventually take control of the workplaces, take control of the economy, have a general strike, and shut down capitalism. That was their vision. I think that is a very inspiring vision to have, and I think that deepened Connolly's understanding, I think, of the role of struggle in the workplace, the role of the working class themselves in achieving and creating socialism. So that idea that came from Marx, that socialism is about the self-emancipation of the working class, it's not something that is given to people, people have to fight for it themselves. I think that Connolly's experience in America really, really spoke to that. And obviously when he came back and met up with Jim Larkin, there was a very vibrant trade union movement in Ireland. The 1907 Belfast dock strike, the 1913 lockout, where Connolly, Larkin and their comrades attempted to implement the kind of militant trade unionism based on a culture of solidarity, based on a culture of resistance, based on the idea that, like, we're out to change the whole of society, not just win a better contract. That really was at the centre of what they were trying to do. So I think that their model, Connolly and Larkin's model of trade unionism, is also a very important trade contribution that I think we need trade unions today to live up to. Right? We need unions that are ready to fight, with rank and fighters, people who are at work themselves, leading those struggles. I'm running out of time here, so I'll quickly say a couple of things about a few other important things. One is Connolly. I think Connolly's contribution about how to unite Protestants and Catholics is also a very important one, right? Because Connolly didn't just write from afar, Catholics and Protestants should do this. Connolly was an organiser, a trade union organiser in Belfast. So he was for working class unity. He worked, he organised he was central to a very important dock strike when he was first in Belfast that brought Catholics and Protestants together. So he's seen the potential, but he also understood the challenges that existed in a place like Belfast, with a section of the working class who were, constantly bombarded with pro-Britain unionist arguments, and where there was real sectarianism towards the Catholic working class. And I think his argument was that we have to fight for working class unity around all sorts of issues, workplace issues, anything that can bring people together, but we also have to challenge Protestant worker support for the Orange state, or the Orange for Orangeism, that we can't just ignore it and act like it's not there. For example, we can't just ignore racism. We actually have to challenge racism while we're trying to work with people and bring them into a struggle. And at the same time, he argued, look, Sinn Féin's strategy is going to offer absolutely nothing to Protestant workers, because it basically just says all we're aiming to do is change the flag and you'll have an independent Ireland. But what is that going to offer to Protestant workers? It doesn't offer very much. You actually have the vision of saying there's going to be a different kind of society, and this is why it's worth it for you to break from everything you've been brought up and taught about, and break with the Queen, and break with the Union Jack, and break with loyalism. So that's why Connolly again says, unless we're striving for Workers' Republic, we're not going to win over the Protestant working class. I'll end with this, which is there was three things that were traumatising for Connolly. One was the partition. Connolly was against it, said Labour should fight to the death, and it would create a carnival reaction both sides of the border. He was absolutely right, and we're living with the legacy of that right now. Connolly had the vision of it and understood why we should oppose it. World War I erupted, the socialist movement collapses, right? And I think for any socialist, revolutionary socialist at the time, despite their theories, this was a completely demoralising experience. And the only way I think it's, sometimes just, the way in which we're talking right now about the kind of apocalypse that climate change is creating, right? I think that like 1914 was an apocalypse for people. It shattered people's confidence in the future. The idea that we're going to take all the society, all the wealth in society, and put it to work for us. Civilization, as Connolly said, was being destroyed in front of everybody's eyes, and the bodies were piling up. And a lot of people fell into despair. A lot of socialist leaders abandoned the working class struggle, supported their own governments. Connolly didn't, right? And what he argued was that, he said, he made a number of arguments. He said, in this war, we have to seize this opportunity for social revolution, right? We have to figure out a way, and the union that Connolly was at the centre of building had just been defeated. So he was trying to figure out, how do we go forward? How do we organise for revolution in a context that is not great? The conditions that they had weren't great. And he said, look, any kind of rising in Ireland, and this is where I think the way he envisioned 1916 is very important, because some people think he just fell into complete despair and joined up with the Republicans, martyred himself for an Irish Republic, and then he abandoned socialism. I don't think it's true. In 1914, he argued, we have to seize this opportunity by more or less any means necessary. We have to try and gather the forces that are for a rebellion against the war, a rebellion against the empire. And he said any kind of uprising in Ireland could actually lead to a revolution across Europe, not just against the war, but against capital, the force that the institution, the system that breeds war, that is making this war necessary. And I think that that's how he entered into 1916. He had to make all sorts of accommodations, some concessions, but he still had a vision
of fighting for a workers-run society. And I think he was absolutely right. Going into 1916, he said, look, Europe is ripe for revolution. And the only thing Lenin and others said about that was that the accident of the Irish was that they rose prematurely. But I think Connolly understood the impact that the war was having on working class people across Europe. So I think the best way for us to serve Connolly's ideas and tradition and legacy is to take inspiration from his socialist ideas and build the kind of political organisation that we're attempting to build, the Socialist Workers' Party and People Before Profit, and make sure we build the kind of organisation that can fight for these strategies and tactics and ideas in the struggles going forward.